So here's a tip on how to make an enclosure like Blue's, which is 7 foot by 4 foot, adequate for a monitor. 7 foot by 4 foot is not adequate for a monitor that is going to be in that cage day in and day out. However, on a daily basis, Blue gets a few hours of roam time in this. This add-on turns his 7 foot by 4 foot enclosure into an 8 foot by 7 foot enclosure, giving him plenty of roam space where he is safe. He cannot get into anything he is not supposed to. He can't mess with electrical cords, get a foot in a power outlet, or anything like that. He can't get under any of my furniture and into things that I may not know are there. And it's good stretch space for him. You see, I've put up the pen, so he's going to go up and get in his basking spot and get warm enough to come out and roam his pen a little bit. This is a way to make a smaller enclosure, not a tiny enclosure, but a smaller enclosure than recommended, adequate for your monitor. This cage is not adequate for a monitor's full life. I will not claim that my enclosure at 7 foot by 4 foot is perfect for Blue. However, I take steps, and when he eats, you'll see in my videos, he does lots of exercise and gets lots of stimulation during feeding time. So he's not getting just food thrown into his cage where he gets to sit and get fat. This is his roam pen. Just a good tip for those of you who may not have the space for your monitor, but want to give them the best life possible. This thing is totally collapsible, and it folds up and can slide behind the door or behind his cage even. Easily stored, takes about 2 minutes to put up, attaches to the side of his cage. He can't get out of it. He doesn't try to get out of it. It's his roam space. So there you go. Great tip to make a smaller enclosure way more adequate for your animal. But you have to do this regularly. This isn't like a once a week and it's good enough for them thing. But yeah, 10 foot by 3 foot enclosure for a monitor that doesn't get this kind of out of the cage stimulation exercise. He gets enrichment out of the cage and plenty of roam time. You see, he's good weight. There's no big fat belly hanging to the ground there. Huh, Blue? He's good weight because he gets lots of exercise. Sometimes having a large cage, if he had a big 10 foot by 10 foot cage, he'd probably still just sleep underneath that basking spot most of the day. But when I get this out, normally I introduce him to something new, like a paper bag or a box that live crickets came in, so he has something to pique his interest. And he gets out and he roams. He explores this space. He stretches out, and then he goes back to his cage and he warms back up, and he'll come back out. If he had a huge enclosure, he probably would be less active than he is now. That big enclosure, while it gives them room to move around, does not always force them to move around. This, when I put the pen up, every time he comes out and he explores it, and it causes him to generate his own enrichment. Sometimes he'll walk in pace in circles and go in and out of his cage for 2 or 3 hours straight without stopping. So yeah, almost a better option than a giant enclosure, because it not only makes you a part of their enrichment, but it causes them to want to get the enrichment because they get out of their enclosure. Not saying big enclosures are bad, but monitors aren't going to give themselves the enrichment they require that they would usually get in the wild because they're not driven to search for food. So in captivity, we have to come up with more creative ways to give them that enrichment and exercise.